Catherine stood in the grand hall of the palace, her heart beating so loud she could hear it in her ears. The golden crown sat on a velvet cushion in front of her, shimmering under the crystal chandeliers. She had worked her entire life for this moment. Every sacrifice, every sleepless night, every tear she had hidden from the world had led her here. She was not born into royalty. Her mother had been a seamstress in the palace, and her father worked in the royal gardens. Catherine had grown up running through the servant corridors, watching from behind pillars as the royal family lived their glamorous lives. But she had something they didn't have. She had determination burning in her chest like a flame that never went out. When she was just 8 years old, Catherine had promised herself that one day she would stand where they stood. People laughed at her dreams. The other servant children called her crazy. Even her own parents gently told her to be realistic. But Catherine studied in secret. She learned 5 languages by listening to the royal tutors through closed doors. She taught herself history, politics, and diplomacy by reading books she borrowed from the palace library when no one was looking. By the time she turned 16, Catherine had become indispensable to the royal household. She started as a simple maid, but her intelligence couldn't stay hidden for long. The queen noticed how Catherine could solve problems that confused the advisors. She saw how the young woman could calm tensions between arguing nobles with just a few wise words. Slowly, Catherine rose through the ranks. Years passed like pages turning in a book. Catherine became an advisor, then a chief consultant, then finally the queen's most trusted confidant. When the old queen fell ill, she made a decision that shocked the entire kingdom. She declared that Catherine, the girl from the servant quarters, would be her successor. The nobles protested. They said it was against tradition, against the natural order of things. But the queen's word was law, and her will was written in stone. Now Catherine stood here, moments away from her coronation. The crown that had existed for 300 years would soon rest on her head. The archbishop held the ancient text, ready to recite the sacred words. Hundreds of people filled the hall, some happy for her, some bitter with jealousy, and some simply curious to see if a common girl could truly become a queen. Catherine's hands trembled as she stepped forward. Her simple past and her complicated future met in this single moment. She thought about her mother, who had died 2 years ago without seeing this day. Her father sat in the front row, tears already streaming down his weathered face. He had worked 40 years in those gardens, and now his daughter would rule over them. The weight of responsibility pressed down on Catherine's shoulders. She knew this wasn't just about wearing a crown and living in luxury. The kingdom faced serious problems. The treasury was nearly empty. Neighboring countries eyed their borders with hungry looks. The common people struggled to feed their families while the nobles hoarded their wealth. Catherine had plans to fix everything, ideas that had kept her awake at night for months. But first she had to get through this ceremony. The archbishop began speaking in his deep, solemn voice. Catherine barely heard the words. Her mind drifted to a memory from her childhood. She was 10 years old, hiding behind a marble column, watching a royal banquet. She had been so hungry that night. Her stomach growled as she watched them feast on food that could have fed her family for a month. A young prince had noticed her, and instead of calling the guards, he had secretly brought her a plate of food. That small act of kindness had restored her faith in humanity during a dark time. Now that same prince stood among the observers, watching her rise to a position higher than his own. Life had a strange way of turning tables. Catherine caught his eye, and he gave her a small nod of respect. She nodded back, grateful for that memory and for this moment. The archbishop lifted the crown from its cushion. The rubies embedded in the gold caught the light and threw red sparkles across the walls. Catherine lowered her head slightly, preparing to receive the weight she had chased for so many years. This was it, the moment when everything changed forever. But as the crown moved through the air toward her head, something unexpected happened. A sound echoed through the hall, sharp and urgent. The massive doors at the entrance burst open with a crash that made everyone jump. Catherine's head snapped up, her eyes wide with shock. A messenger stumbled into the hall, his clothes torn and dirty, his face pale with exhaustion and fear. He fell to his knees, gasping for breath. Guards rushed toward him, but he raised his hand desperately. "Wait," he choked out. "Please, I bring urgent news. The northern border has been breached. An army of 10,000 soldiers marches toward the capital. They will be here in 3 days." The hall erupted in chaos. Nobles shouted questions. Ladies screamed. The archbishop nearly dropped the crown in his shock. Catherine stood frozen, her mind racing faster than lightning. This was an attack, carefully timed to happen during the coronation when the kingdom's guard would be focused on ceremony rather than defense. The head general pushed through the crowd. This cannot be true. Our scouts reported nothing unusual last week. The messenger shook his head, still struggling to breathe. They came through the mountain pass, the one we thought was impassable this time of year. They must have been planning this for months. Catherine's heart sank. The crown suddenly seemed less important than the thousands of lives that would be lost if she didn't act immediately. She looked at the golden symbol of power, hovering in the archbishop's uncertain hands. Was she even queen yet? Could she give orders? Did she have the authority to mobilize the army? The old general turned to her, his eyes searching her face. "What are your orders, Your Majesty?" Everyone fell silent. They all looked at Catherine, waiting to see what the girl from the servant quarters would do when real crisis struck. This was not the ceremony she had imagined. This was not the peaceful beginning to her reign that she had hoped for. But life never cared about anyone's plans. Catherine took a deep breath. Her trembling hands slowly steadied. She had spent her entire life preparing to lead, and now leadership was being demanded of her before the crown even touched her head. She opened her mouth to speak, to show everyone that she was ready for this responsibility, that she could protect the kingdom she was about to inherit. Catherine's voice rang out clear and strong across the silent hall. "Send riders to every village between here and the northern border. Evacuate the people to the southern fortresses. General Marcus, gather our forces immediately. I want every available soldier ready to march within the hour." The general hesitated for just a moment, then bowed deeply. "Yes, Your Majesty." The title felt strange on his tongue, spoken to a woman who wasn't yet officially crowned, but the crisis left no room for ceremony or tradition. The nobles began whispering among themselves. Some looked impressed, others skeptical. Lady Helena, who had always opposed Catherine's rise to power, stepped forward with a sneer on her painted face. "Forgive me, but should we trust the word of one dirty messenger? Perhaps this is a trick to disrupt the coronation. Perhaps some people want to prevent this ceremony from happening." Her words carried accusation, and everyone understood what she meant. Catherine felt anger flash through her chest, but she forced herself to stay calm. Losing her temper now would make her look weak and inexperienced. "Whether it's a trick or the truth, we cannot afford to ignore it," Catherine replied firmly. "If it's false, we will have wasted some time and effort. If it's true and we do nothing, thousands will die. I know which risk I prefer to take." The archbishop, still holding the crown awkwardly, cleared his throat. "Perhaps we should complete the coronation first. It would only take a few more minutes, then your authority would be unquestionable." Catherine looked at the crown, so close she could almost feel its weight on her head. Every fiber of her being wanted to reach out and take it, to finally claim what she had worked for. But she thought about the families in those northern villages, families like hers had been, families with children who laughed and played, not knowing that danger marched toward them. "No," she said quietly. "Every minute matters. The ceremony can wait. Lives cannot." She turned to the general again. "I'm coming with you to plan the defense. We need maps of the northern region and reports on our current military strength." The hall buzzed with shocked murmurs. A woman leading troops into battle? It was unheard of. It was scandalous. But Catherine had not come this far by following expectations. She had come this far by breaking them. Her father stood up from his seat, his face worried but proud. He didn't say anything, but his eyes spoke volumes. "Be careful. Be brave. Come back to me." Catherine gave him a small smile before turning and walking toward the exit, her coronation gown swishing around her feet. The general hurried after her, along with several advisors and military commanders. The messenger, still weak from his journey, was helped to his feet and given water. As Catherine passed him, she stopped and placed a hand on his shoulder. "What's your name?" she asked gently. "Thomas, Your Majesty. I rode for 2 days without stopping to bring you this warning. You may have saved thousands of lives today, Thomas. The kingdom will not forget your service." Thomas's exhausted face brightened with pride, and Catherine continued on her way. The crown remained behind in the hall, sitting on its velvet cushion, waiting for a queen who had chosen her people over her own coronation. In the war room, maps were spread across the large oak table. Catherine studied them with intense focus, her finger tracing the route the enemy army would likely take. The generals explained their forces, their weaknesses, their supplies. The news was not good. The kingdom's army had been reduced in recent years due to budget cuts. Many soldiers had been dismissed and the equipment was old. "We have perhaps 6,000 trained soldiers immediately available," General Marcus said grimly. "Against 10,000, and they will have the advantage of momentum and surprise." Catherine's mind worked like a machine, calculating possibilities and strategies. She had studied every major battle in history during her years of secret learning. She knew that numbers weren't everything. Terrain mattered, timing mattered, psychology mattered. "The mountain pass they came through," she said suddenly. "Can we block it? Trap them between the mountains and our forces?" A younger officer shook his head. "By now they're probably through the pass completely. They'll be in the open valleys." Catherine traced her finger along the map, following rivers and roads. Then she saw it. A narrow canyon about a day's march from the capital. Any army traveling from the north would have to pass through it. The steep walls would neutralize the advantage of greater numbers. "Here," she said, pointing. "We make our stand here. We won't have to fight 10,000 at once. The canyon will force them to come at us in smaller groups." The generals leaned in, studying the location. General Marcus nodded slowly. "It could work. But we would need to get there before them, set up our positions, prepare the ground. Then we leave immediately. No delays." An older advisor, Lord Vincent, spoke up nervously. "Your Majesty, perhaps you should remain here, in safety. Let the generals handle the military matters while you govern from the palace." Catherine turned to face him, and her eyes held a fire that made him take a step back. "I have asked thousands of men to risk their lives for this kingdom. I will not hide behind walls while they face danger. If I am to be their queen, I will lead them. If I am not worthy to stand beside them in their darkest hour, then I am not worthy to wear the crown in their brightest ones." No one argued after that. The room fell silent except for the sound of orders being written and plans being made. Catherine worked alongside the military commanders like she had been doing it her whole life. She asked questions, offered suggestions, and made decisions with a confidence that surprised even herself. Outside the palace, news of the invasion spread through the capital like wildfire. People rushed to pack their belongings to prepare for evacuation or siege. Some panicked, but others felt a strange sense of hope. They had heard about Catherine, the commoner who rose to almost wear the crown. Now they heard she had postponed her coronation to defend them. Stories spread quickly through the streets about how she chose them over her own glory. As night fell, the army assembled in the palace courtyard. 6,000 soldiers, some young and nervous, some old and battle-scarred, all looking uncertain, about following a queen who hadn't even been crowned yet. Catherine walked among them, still wearing her coronation gown because there had been no time to change. The fine silk was already dirty from kneeling over maps and rushing through dusty corridors. She climbed onto a platform so everyone could see her. The torchlight flickered across her face, making her look both young and ancient at the same time. She was only 28 years old, but her eyes held the wisdom of someone who had struggled for every breath of life. "Soldiers of the kingdom," she called out, her voice carrying across the courtyard. "I know you don't know me. I know many of you question whether a woman can lead, whether someone from common birth can command respect. I am not here to convince you with words. I am here to prove it with actions." She paused, looking across the sea of faces. "Tomorrow we march to defend our home. Not my home, not the palace, but all our homes. The homes of farmers and blacksmiths, of teachers and merchants, of every person who calls this land their own. We fight not for a crown or a title. We fight for each other." The soldiers listened to Catherine's words with mixed feelings showing on their faces. Some nodded in agreement. Others remained stone-faced and doubtful. She could see the questions in their eyes. Could this woman really protect them? Would she run at the first sign of real danger? "I see your doubt," Catherine continued, her voice honest and direct. "You wonder if I have ever held a sword? if I have ever seen battle, if I have the strength to lead you through what comes next. The truth is, I have not fought in wars, but I have fought every day of my life to stand here before you. I have fought poverty and prejudice. I have fought those who said a servant's daughter had no right to dream of anything better. She lifted her chin higher, and her voice grew stronger. I may not have your battle scars, but I have my own. And I promise you this, I will not send you anywhere I would not go myself. I will not ask you to face any danger I would not face beside you. We stand together, or we fall together. A young soldier near the front, barely old enough to grow a beard, raised his hand hesitantly. Catherine nodded at him to speak. Your Majesty, my mother is in one of the northern villages. Do you really think we can save them? Catherine felt her heart squeeze with sympathy. She could have lied and given him false hope. She could have made grand promises that might not come true, but she respected these soldiers too much for that. I think we have a chance, she said honestly. A real chance if we move fast and fight smart. Your mother and everyone else in those villages are counting on us. We cannot let them down. The young soldier nodded, satisfied with her truthfulness. Something shifted in the courtyard then. The soldiers seemed to stand a little straighter. Their eyes showed a bit less doubt and a bit more determination. They might not fully trust her yet, but they respected her honesty. General Marcus approached Catherine as she stepped down from the platform. That was well spoken, Your Majesty. The men needed to hear that. They needed to hear the truth, Catherine replied. I will not rule with pretty lies. As the soldiers prepared for the march, Catherine finally had a moment to return to her chambers and change into more practical clothing. Her lady's maid, Elena, waited there with riding clothes already prepared. Elena had been Catherine's friend since childhood, one of the few people who had never doubted her dreams. You're really doing this, Elena said softly as she helped Catherine out of the elaborate gown. You're really going to war. I have no choice. How can I ask them to die for me if I won't stand with them? Elena's hands trembled as she fastened the buttons on Catherine's riding jacket. What if something happens to you? What if you never get to wear that crown? Catherine looked at her friend in the mirror. Then at least I will have tried to deserve it. A crown means nothing if the person wearing it has no honor. She strapped on a sword belt, though she barely knew how to use the weapon. It felt heavy and awkward against her hip. She also took a small dagger and tucked it into her boot. If nothing else, she would not be captured alive and used as a hostage. Before leaving her chambers, Catherine went to her desk and pulled out a letter she had written weeks ago. It was addressed to her father, to be opened only if she did not return. In it, she had poured out all the love and gratitude she had never been good at expressing in person. She handed it to Elena. Keep this safe, just in case. Elena took the letter with tears in her eyes. Come back, Catherine. Promise me you'll come back. I promise to try my very best. The army marched out of the capital under a sky full of stars. The sound of thousands of boots hitting the road created a rhythm like a giant heartbeat. Catherine rode at the front on a gray horse, flanked by General Marcus and his officers. She had never led an army before, but she tried to sit tall and look confident. The march would take almost a full day and night to reach the canyon where they planned to make their stand. They pushed hard, stopping only briefly for water and rest. Catherine rode the entire way, refusing offers to take a carriage. If the soldiers could march, she could ride. She would not appear weak or pampered. As dawn broke on the second day, they reached the canyon. Catherine had seen it on maps, but the real thing took her breath away. The walls rose up like the hands of giants, creating a narrow passage barely wide enough for 20 men to stand side by side. This would be their battlefield. General Marcus immediately began positioning troops. Archers were placed on the canyon walls where they could rain arrows down on anyone trying to pass through. Infantry formed defensive lines across the canyon floor. Supplies and medical tents were set up at the rear. Everyone worked with urgent efficiency because they knew the enemy could arrive at any time. Catherine moved through the preparations, learning as she watched. She asked questions about strategy and tactics. The general seemed surprised by her genuine interest and her quick understanding. She might not have battle experience, but her intelligence helped her grasp military concepts faster than many officers who had trained for years. By midday, scouts returned with grim news. The enemy army had been spotted just a few hours away. They were moving faster than expected, pushing their soldiers hard. They would arrive before nightfall. The atmosphere in the canyon changed immediately. Nervous energy turned to focused tension. Soldiers checked their weapons and armor. Some prayed to their gods. Others wrote letters to loved ones, just as Catherine had done. The reality of coming battle settled over everyone like a heavy blanket. Catherine found herself standing alone for a moment on a small rise overlooking the canyon. Her hands gripped the reins of her horse tightly. Fear twisted in her stomach. What if her plan failed? What if she had led these men to their deaths? What if her pride and ambition had blinded her to her own limitations? Having second thoughts? A voice spoke behind her. She turned to see Lord Edmund, one of the older nobles who had traveled with the army. He had fought in wars before and bore the scars to prove it. Terrified thoughts, Catherine admitted. I keep wondering if I made the right choice. Lord Edmund smiled slightly. That's how I know you might actually be a good leader. The truly dangerous commanders are the ones who never doubt themselves. What if I fail? What if people die because of my decisions? People die in war regardless of who leads them. The question is whether you make those deaths mean something, whether you fight for something worth dying for. He looked out at the soldiers preparing below. These men followed you here, not because they had to, but because you gave them hope. Don't waste their faith. His words settled something inside Catherine. She took a deep breath and nodded. There was no point in doubting now. The time for hesitation had passed. Now was the time for action. As the sun began to sink toward the horizon, a soldier on watch atop the canyon wall called out, "They're coming! I see their banners." Catherine's heart jumped into her throat. She mounted her horse and rode to the front lines where General Marcus waited. The general looked at her seriously. "Last chance to move to the rear, Your Majesty." "No one would think less of you." Catherine shook her head. "I stay here. If the line breaks, we all fall together anyway." In the distance, the first enemy soldiers appeared at the canyon entrance. They moved in organized formations, their armor glinting in the fading sunlight. War drums began to beat, a deep, booming sound that echoed off the canyon walls and seemed to shake the very ground. Catherine's horse shifted nervously beneath her, sensing her fear. She patted its neck with a trembling hand, trying to calm both the animal and herself. Around her, soldiers gripped their weapons tighter. The air felt thick with anticipation and dread. The enemy army stopped just outside the canyon entrance. A single rider came forward carrying a white flag. General Marcus rode out to meet him, and Catherine followed despite the general's protests. She needed to hear this herself. The enemy messenger was a tall man with a scarred face and cold eyes. He looked Catherine up and down with barely hidden contempt before speaking. "I bring a message from Commander Ravek. He offers you terms of surrender." "We're listening," General Marcus said gruffly. "Surrender now and your soldiers will be allowed to leave unharmed." "The commander wants only the palace and the crown. He has no interest in unnecessary bloodshed." Catherine felt anger rising in her chest. "Tell your commander that the crown is not his to take. This kingdom belongs to its people, not to whoever has the largest army." The messenger's lips curled into a cruel smile. "The commander also said you might be foolish enough to refuse. He asked me to remind you that you have 6,000 men against his 10,000. You cannot win." "Numbers are not everything," Catherine replied, keeping her voice steady even though her heart pounded. "Tell your commander that if he wants the crown, he will have to come through this canyon and take it. We will not surrender." The messenger looked at her like she was a stupid child. "So be it. Your deaths will be on your own head, girl." He turned his horse and rode back to his army without another word. General Marcus and Catherine returned to their lines. The general spoke quietly so only she could hear. "There is still time to reconsider. We could retreat, regroup, find another way to fight." "No," Catherine said firmly. "We hold this position. If we retreat now, we show weakness. The enemy will chase us all the way to the capital, destroying villages along the way. Here we have the advantage of terrain. Here we make our stand." As darkness fell, torches were lit on both sides of the canyon. The enemy army made camp just outside the entrance, confident in their superior numbers. Catherine's forces remained at their defensive positions, knowing sleep would be impossible anyway. Catherine walked among her soldiers, speaking words of encouragement. She was surprised to find that many of them seemed calmer than she felt. They had accepted what was coming and made peace with it. Their simple courage humbled her and strengthened her resolve. A young captain named Derek approached her hesitantly. "Your Majesty, some of us were talking. We want you to know that even if we don't make it through tomorrow, we're glad we followed you here. You gave us something to believe in." Catherine felt tears prick her eyes, but she blinked them back. We will make it through tomorrow. I believe that with everything in me. Whether we do or not, you're already a true queen in our eyes. Crown or no crown. Those words stayed with Catherine through the long night. She had spent her entire life chasing a crown, believing it was the thing that would make her worthy, that would prove she mattered. But here in this canyon, facing possible death, she realized the crown had never been the point. The point was being willing to sacrifice for something bigger than herself. Dawn came too quickly. The enemy drums began again, louder now, more insistent. Commander Ravek's army formed into attack columns at the canyon entrance. Catherine could see the commander himself on a black horse directing his troops. He looked like a man who had never lost a battle and expected this one to be just as easy. The first wave of enemy soldiers charged into the canyon. They came screaming war cries, shields raised, weapons ready. Catherine's archers on the canyon walls released their arrows in waves that darkened the sky. Dozens of enemy soldiers fell, but more kept coming, stepping over their fallen comrades without hesitation. The two armies crashed together with a sound like thunder. The narrow canyon worked exactly as Catherine had hoped. The enemy's greater numbers meant nothing because they could only attack in limited waves. Her soldiers held the line, fighting with desperate courage. Catherine found herself in the thick of battle despite General Marcus's attempts to keep her back. Her sword felt clumsy in her hand, but she swung it anyway when an enemy soldier broke through and came at her. She was terrible at fighting, but pure survival instinct kept her moving. A soldier named Thomas, not the messenger but a different Thomas, stepped in front of her and killed her attacker, saving her life. "Stay behind me, Your Majesty," he shouted over the noise of battle. The fighting went on for hours. Catherine's throat was raw from shouting orders and encouragement. Her arms ached from gripping her sword. The canyon floor became slippery with blood. The sounds of screaming men and clashing metal filled the air until she thought she would go mad from it. But her forces held. The canyon strategy was working. Every time the enemy tried to push through, they were forced into a bottleneck where Catherine's soldiers could meet them with equal force. The enemy's numbers were becoming a disadvantage because the soldiers in the back could not help those in the front. As the sun reached its highest point, Commander Ravek tried a different tactic. He pulled his forces back and had his archers fire into the canyon from outside. Arrows rained down, forcing Catherine's soldiers to raise their shields and take cover. Several men fell, and Catherine felt each loss like a knife in her heart. General Marcus grabbed her arm. "We need to respond. If we just sit here taking arrow fire, we'll be picked apart." Catherine's mind raced. They had archers on the canyon walls, but not enough to match the enemy's numbers. She needed something else, some way to turn the situation around. Then she remembered something from her studies of ancient battles. "The canyon walls," she said suddenly. "Can we collapse them? Create a rock slide?" The general's eyes widened. "It's possible, but dangerous. We could trap ourselves in here. We're trapped anyway if we lose. Tell the engineers to prepare explosives at the canyon entrance. When the next wave attacks, we'll bring the walls down on them." It was a risky plan that could go terribly wrong, but Catherine was learning that leadership often meant choosing between bad options and worse ones. General Marcus gave the orders, and soldiers scrambled to place. Barrels of blasting powder at strategic points along the canyon walls near the entrance, Commander. Ravek must have seen the activity because he ordered another charge before the preparations were complete. Enemy soldiers poured into the canyon again, and Catherine's forces met them with tired arms and fading energy. They had been fighting for hours, and exhaustion was setting in. Catherine saw the engineers still working frantically on the explosives. They needed more time. She made a split-second decision that would have made her advisors back at the palace call her crazy. She rode forward past her own front lines and positioned herself in clear view of the enemy. "Commander Ravek," she shouted at the top of her lungs. "Are you too cowardly to face me yourself? Do you hide behind your soldiers while a woman stands before you?" The fighting paused as everyone processed what was happening. Catherine sat on her horse in the middle of the battlefield, completely exposed, challenging the enemy commander to single combat. It was an ancient tradition, rarely practiced anymore, but still technically valid according to the old laws of war. General Marcus looked horrified. Several of Catherine's soldiers started to move forward to protect her, but she held up her hand to stop them. Commander Ravek rode forward slowly, looking amused. He was a massive man, scarred and hardened by decades of warfare. Next to him, Catherine looked like a child playing dress-up in warrior's clothing. You challenge me to single combat? Commander Ravek's voice boomed across the canyon. You, a girl who has never seen battle until today? I do, Catherine said, hoping her voice did not shake as much as her hands. If you win, my forces will surrender. If I win, you retreat and leave our lands. Ravek threw back his head and laughed. His soldiers joined in, and the sound echoed mockingly off the canyon walls. You truly are a fool, but I accept your challenge. It will be entertaining to end this quickly. What Commander Ravek did not know was that Catherine had no intention of actually fighting him. She knew she would lose in seconds. This was a distraction, a way to buy time for the engineers to finish placing the explosives. She just needed to keep his attention for a few more minutes. Ravek dismounted from his horse and drew his sword. The blade was huge and notched from countless battles. Catherine dismounted as well, her legs nearly giving out from fear and exhaustion. She raised her own sword, which suddenly felt as heavy as the world. Behind the enemy lines, she caught a glimpse of the engineers giving her a signal. They were ready. Now she just needed to get out of the way without making it obvious. Ravek charged at her with surprising speed for such a large man. Catherine barely managed to dodge his first swing. The blade whistled past her ear close enough that she felt the air move. She stumbled backward, her feet clumsy, her sword arm shaking. Stand still and die with dignity, Ravek snarled, swinging again. Catherine ducked and rolled, her fine riding clothes getting covered in dust and blood from the battlefield. She was not fighting. She was just trying not to die for another minute, another 30 seconds, anything to give her people time. Ravek's patience ran out. He came at her with a flurry of strikes that Catherine had no hope of blocking or dodging. She felt his blade slice across her left arm and hot pain exploded through her body. She cried out and fell to her knees. Pathetic, Ravek said, raising his sword for the killing blow. You should have stayed in your palace playing pretend. At that moment, General Marcus gave the signal. The engineers lit the fuses. For a heartbeat, nothing happened. Then the world exploded. The blasting powder detonated with an ear-splitting roar. The canyon walls at the entrance crumbled, tons of rock and stone falling like a deadly waterfall. Enemy soldiers who had been waiting just outside the entrance were buried instantly. The rockslide continued, blocking the passage completely and cutting off the enemy army. Commander Ravek turned in shock to see half his forces trapped on the wrong side of the collapse. Catherine used his distraction to scramble away, clutching her bleeding arm. Her soldiers rushed forward and surrounded her, protecting her from Ravek's fury. You deceived me, Ravek roared. That was not honorable combat. You invaded our lands without provocation, Catherine shot back, her voice tight with pain. Honor died when you crossed our borders. The situation had shifted dramatically. The enemy soldiers trapped inside the canyon with Catherine's forces were now outnumbered and surrounded. The majority of Ravek's army was on the other side of the rockslide, unable to help. The commander looked around, calculating his odds, and for the first time, Catherine saw doubt in his eyes. Surrender, Catherine said, standing despite the pain in her arm. You have lost the advantage. There is no shame in surrendering when you are beaten. Ravek's face turned purple with rage. For a moment, Catherine thought he would attack despite the impossibility of victory, but then his shoulders sagged. He was a warrior, but he was not stupid. He knew when a battle was lost. I surrender, he said through gritted teeth. May the gods curse you for your trickery. Call it trickery if it makes you feel better, Catherine replied. I call it strategy. The remaining enemy soldiers laid down their weapons. It was over. Catherine's forces had won. The relief that flooded through her was so intense that her legs finally gave out completely. She collapsed onto the blood-soaked ground, her vision swimming with black spots. Hands lifted her gently. A medic appeared and began wrapping her wounded arm. The cut was deep but not fatal. She would carry the scar for the rest of her life, a permanent reminder of this day. Around her, soldiers cheered and embraced each other. They had survived. Against terrible odds, they had actually survived. General Marcus knelt beside her, his weathered face showing open admiration. That was either the bravest or most foolish thing I have ever seen, Your Majesty. Possibly both, Catherine managed a weak smile. Did it work? You won the battle and saved the kingdom. Yes, it worked. As the medic finished bandaging her arm, Catherine forced herself to stand. There was still work to do. The enemy army on the other side of the rockslide needed to be dealt with. Prisoners needed to be secured. Wounded soldiers needed care. The dead needed to be honored. She sent messengers to negotiate with the enemy forces on the other side of the collapsed canyon. Without their commander and facing an enemy that had just proven itself clever and determined, they agreed to a full retreat. They would return to their own lands and leave the kingdom in peace. Catherine let them go, not because she was merciful, but because pursuing them would cost more lives she was not willing to spend. The journey back to the capital took 3 days instead of 1. The army moved slowly, carrying wounded and dead. Catherine rode at the front again, though every movement sent pain shooting through her injured arm. She would not show weakness now, not when her soldiers had fought so hard. News of the victory had already reached the capital before they arrived. People lined the streets cheering and throwing flowers. Children ran alongside the army, singing songs about the brave queen who fought beside her soldiers. Catherine barely recognized herself in their songs. She felt like the same frightened girl who had grown up in the palace servant quarters. Her father waited at the palace gates, tears streaming down his face. When Catherine dismounted, he wrapped her in his arms, holding her like she was still a child. "I thought I had lost you," he whispered. "I promised to try my best to come back," Catherine whispered into his shoulder. "I kept my promise." The archbishop waited in the throne room, the crown still resting on its velvet cushion exactly where it had been left days ago. The nobles had gathered again, but their faces looked different now. The doubt and skepticism had been replaced with something else. Respect, fear, perhaps a bit of both. Lady Helena, who had questioned Catherine before the battle, approached and did something Catherine never expected. She bowed deeply. "I was wrong about you, Your Majesty. Forgive my harsh words." "There is nothing to forgive," Catherine said tiredly. "Doubt is natural. Proof is earned." The coronation ceremony began again, just as it had days ago, but everything felt different now. Catherine was different. She stood before the archbishop with dirt still under her fingernails and a bandage wrapped around her arm. Her coronation gown had been ruined in battle, so she wore simple but elegant clothes instead. The archbishop began the sacred words, the same words that had been interrupted by news of invasion. Catherine listened carefully this time, understanding the weight of each promise she was making. To protect the kingdom, to serve its people, to rule with wisdom and justice. The crown was lifted from its cushion. Catherine watched it rise through the air, gold and rubies catching the light. Her hands, which had trembled so badly before, were steady now. She had learned something important in that canyon. The crown did not make her a queen. Her actions did. Her willingness to sacrifice did. Her choice to stand with her people instead of above them did. The crown touched her head, and the archbishop spoke the final words. "I present to you Catherine I, Queen of the Realm, Defender of the People, Keeper of Justice." The hall erupted in applause. But Catherine barely heard it. She was thinking about the soldiers who had died in the canyon, who would never see this moment. She was thinking about the villages that had been evacuated, the families torn apart by fear. She was thinking about everything this crown represented and everything it demanded. When the ceremony ended and she sat on the throne for the first time, Catherine made a silent promise to herself. She would be worthy of this crown, not because of her birth or her cleverness, but because every single day she would work to deserve the trust these people had placed in her. General Marcus approached the throne and bowed. "Your first orders as Queen, Your Majesty?" Catherine thought for a moment. "Send aid to the northern villages. Help them rebuild. Compensate the families of every soldier who died defending the kingdom, whether they were noble or common-born. And begin planning for a stronger, better-trained army so we are never caught unprepared again." The general smiled. "It will be done." As the day turned to evening and the celebrations continued, Catherine finally had a moment alone in her private chambers. She walked to the window and looked out over the city. Lights twinkled in windows. People danced in the streets. Music drifted up from the squares below. Elena entered quietly and stood beside her. "How does it feel? To finally have what you always wanted?" Catherine touched the crown on her head, feeling its weight. "It feels heavy," she said honestly, "but it is a weight I am ready to carry." "You were always ready," Elena said softly. "You just needed to prove it to yourself." Perhaps that was true. Catherine had spent so many years trying to prove herself to everyone else that she forgot she also Months passed after the coronation and the battle. The kingdom slowly healed from the wounds of war. The northern villages were rebuilt stronger than before. The families of fallen soldiers received not just compensation, but also positions in the palace guard or royal service if they wanted them. Catherine had meant what she said about honoring those who sacrificed, but ruling in peacetime proved to be a different kind of battle. The nobles who had bowed to Catherine after her military victory began to push back against her reforms. She wanted to reduce their taxes and increase aid to common people. She wanted to open schools in every village so children, like she had been, could learn without sneaking around. She wanted fair courts where a poor farmer had the same justice as a wealthy lord. These ideas made the nobles nervous. They were used to the old ways where power and privilege flowed to those born into the right families. Catherine was trying to change everything, and change always met resistance. Lady Helena, who had shown respect after the battle, became one of Catherine's strongest opponents in court. "Your Majesty," she said during one particularly tense council meeting, "these reforms will bankrupt the noble families. Where will the kingdom's wealth come from if not from our estates?" "The kingdom's wealth should come from prosperity shared by all its people," Catherine replied firmly. "When farmers can afford better tools, they grow more food. When merchants can trade freely, commerce increases. When children are educated, they become valuable contributors to society. Hoarding wealth in a few hands weakens the entire kingdom." "That is idealistic nonsense," Lord Vincent argued. "The natural order has worked for centuries. Why change it now?" "Because the natural order is unjust," Catherine said, her voice rising with passion. "I grew up watching that natural order. I saw children go hungry while nobles threw away more food than my family ate in a month. I saw brilliant minds wasted in servant quarters because no one would teach them. I will not preserve a system that crushes people based on accidents of birth." The council chamber fell silent. No one knew quite how to respond. Queens were not supposed to speak with such emotion about such things. They were supposed to be distant and dignified, concerned with politics and power rather than the lives of common people. But Catherine was not like other queens. She could not be, even if she tried. Her past shaped her vision for the future. Every decision she made was influenced by memories of the little girl who had pressed her ear against doors to hear lessons she was not allowed to attend. After the meeting, General Marcus found Catherine alone in the palace garden. She was sitting on a bench beneath an apple tree, looking exhausted and frustrated. "They will fight you every step of the way," the general said gently, sitting beside her. "I know. Sometimes I wonder if winning the battle was the easy part." It was. War has clear rules. Politics does not. He paused, then continued. "But you are making a difference, Your Majesty. The people love you. They see themselves in you. That is something no other ruler has ever given them." Catherine looked up at the palace, the building where she had spent her childhood as an invisible servant. "I used to dream about living in the royal chambers. I thought that would be enough, that simply being here would make me happy. But now I understand that having power means nothing if you do not use it to help others. The old queen knew that about you. That is why she chose you as her successor. She saw that your past would make you a better ruler, not a worse one." Those words comforted Catherine, though the fight continued. Over the following months, she pushed her reforms through little by little. Some nobles left court in protest. Others stayed but complained constantly. A few, surprisingly, began to see the wisdom in her ideas and became allies. The schools began opening in villages. The first one was in the northern region that had nearly been destroyed by the invasion. Catherine attended the opening ceremony herself, watching as children filed into the simple but sturdy building. Their faces glowed with excitement and possibility. An old woman approached Catherine at the ceremony. Her hands were rough from years of farm work, and her back was bent from age. "Your Majesty," she said in a trembling voice, "my granddaughter will attend this school. She will learn to read and write. She will have chances I never dreamed of." Catherine felt tears prick her eyes. "That is exactly why we built it. They say you were once like us, a common girl. I was. I am still like you in many ways. I have never forgotten where I came from." The old woman took Catherine's hand and squeezed it tightly. "Thank you for remembering us. Thank you for caring about people like my granddaughter." After the woman left, Catherine stood alone for a moment, watching the children enter the school. This was what the crown meant. Not the gold or the jewels or the palace. It meant the power to change lives, to open doors that had been locked, to give hope where there had been none. But her reforms also created enemies. Not everyone was happy with a queen who challenged tradition. Whispers began circulating through court about plots and schemes. Some nobles wanted to remove Catherine from power and return things to the old ways. One evening, her chief guard, Captain Marcus, came to her chambers with a grave expression. "Your Majesty, we have uncovered a conspiracy. Several nobles are planning to poison you at the upcoming feast." Catherine felt cold fear grip her heart. She had survived war, but betrayal from within felt more dangerous somehow. "Who is involved?" "Lady Helena is one of the ringleaders. Lord Vincent as well. There are others, but these are the main conspirators." Catherine sat down heavily. Lady Helena, who had bowed to her and apologized after the battle. It hurt more than she expected. "What proof do you have?" "We intercepted letters and have testimony from a servant who overheard their planning. The evidence is solid." "Arrest them," Catherine said after a long pause, "but treat them fairly. I want a proper trial, not secret executions. If I become the kind of ruler who acts without justice, I am no better than those I oppose." The arrests sent shockwaves through the court. The trial was public, held in the Great Hall with citizens allowed to attend. Catherine wanted transparency, wanted everyone to see that justice applied to nobles just as much as it did to common people. Lady Helena stood defiant throughout the trial. "You have destroyed everything our families built," she spat at Catherine. "You call it reform. I call it theft. I call it fairness," Catherine responded calmly. "And fairness sometimes means the powerful must give up privileges they never deserved in the first place." The evidence against the conspirators was overwhelming. They were found guilty and sentenced to exile rather than execution. Catherine could have ordered their deaths. Many advisors told her she should, that showing mercy to traitors would make her look weak, but she refused. "I will not rule through fear and blood," she told her council. "Let them leave the kingdom and never return. That is punishment enough." After the trial, more nobles left court voluntarily, not wanting to serve under a queen who would not play by the old rules. But others stayed, including some surprising allies. Young nobles who had secretly agreed with Catherine's ideas but had been too afraid to speak up now, found their voices. A new generation began to rise in court, one that believed in merit over birthright. A year after her coronation, Catherine stood in the throne room reviewing petitions from citizens. This had become her favorite duty. Once a week, she opened the palace to anyone who wanted to bring their problems or ideas directly to the queen. It was unprecedented, and the nobles hated it, but Catherine insisted. A young man approached, nervous but determined. He bowed awkwardly. "Your Majesty, I have invented a new kind of plow that can till fields faster, but I have no money to build more than one. I thought maybe you could help." Catherine listened to his explanation, asked questions, and then approved funding for his invention. If it worked as he claimed, it would help farmers across the kingdom. This was exactly the kind of innovation she wanted to encourage. Later that day, General Marcus found her again in the garden. It had become their regular meeting place for private conversations. "You look happy, Your Majesty. More relaxed than I have seen you in months." "I am making real changes, Marcus. Slowly, but surely. The kingdom is becoming what I always dreamed it could be. You have done more in 1 year than most rulers do in a lifetime. But I worry about you. You work too hard. You take every problem personally," Catherine smiled. "That is because I remember what it was like to have problems no one cared about. I cannot forget, Marcus. I will not forget." As evening fell and stars began appearing in the sky, Catherine returned to her chambers. She removed the crown and set it carefully on its stand. The weight of it had become familiar now, almost comfortable, but she never took it for granted, never forgot what it represented. Elena helped her prepare for bed, just as she had done when they were both young servants sharing a tiny room. Some things had changed, but their friendship remained constant. "You are exhausted," Elena said with concern. "When was the last time you slept a full night?" "I do not remember." "There is always so much to do. The kingdom will not collapse if you rest for one evening." Catherine smiled at her friend. "You sound like my mother used to. Always worried, always trying to make me slow down. Your mother was wise. She would be so proud of you now."